All right, this week we're going to be dealing with samples, and we need to talk about a few vocabulary terms to begin with. First, we have population, a group that you are interested in. In other words, a group that you're trying to find some information about, maybe their likes or dislikes, who they're going to vote for in the next presidential election, so on and so forth. A population, it's not just the standard word that we've been taught, you know, the population of the United States, the population of the world, and so on. But it may be any group that you're interested in. Maybe all the girls at Creekland Middle School. Maybe all the boys at Creekland Middle School. Maybe all students in Cherokee County. You're trying to find out their opinions. Okay, that's what a population is. In other words, you might want to know if the American population approves of the cell phone ban at schools, for example. Another example of a population is all the kids in a school or all the kids in a county. B is a sample. If you're interested in the opinions or interests of a population but do not have the time or the money to talk to everyone, you might perform a sample. A great example of this is you guys have all seen or heard about polls that come out before a presidential election. You know, there was a poll done every day before the presidential election here back in 2012. They didn't go out and talk to every 100 million plus people that was going to vote.
Excuse the interruption, teachers and students, but I need the following students, please.
They were,
Cam Hogan,
they asked
report to room
different
510.
group. They asked, sometimes they would ask 1,000, sometimes they would ask 3,000 people. Because you know, it's unreasonable to think that you can go around and ask every person who they're going to vote for. Same thing, it might be unreasonable for you to ask, for example,
510, Bradley Mason, Jada
bear with me one second while they answer.
Madison Mason, Nicholas Rose, and Nicholas Weiss report to room 517. Thank you.
Another example is if you wanted to get an idea of what everyone's the favorite sports team at Creekland Middle School was, you may not have the time or the inclination to ask 100 or 1,300 plus students. So you might ask the first 50 who come in the door one day. That's an example of a random sample because you don't have the time to ask every single 1,300 students. That is an example of a sample, and you hope to get an idea of what the overall population feels there. Same thing, a representative sample is a sample that represents the entire population. If I asked all the boys at Creekland Middle School, or if I asked just 50 boys, for example, that would not be a representative sample. We want to get the opinions of the girls too. If we, for example, want to know the opinion of, you know, whatever at Creekland Middle School, we would need to ask a good mix of people, both 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, boys and girls. We wouldn't want to just ask 8th grade boys the first 50 we see. We want to get a good representative sample. A biased sample is kind of what I described before, a sample where a particular outcome may be slanted toward one opinion or the other. If you ask all the boys, and you want to get an idea of what the overall feeling was at Creekland Middle School, what their favorite subject was, for example. If you ask just boys, the first 50 boys you see, boys may be inclined to like math or science a little bit more, or maybe inclined to like gym a little bit more. The girls may be more inclined to like chorus or band or something like that. I'm not saying that's the case. What I'm telling you is your results may be what we call biased. Then a survey is basically what we've talked about, a question or set of questions to gather data. And data is just pieces of information or numbers. If I asked 10 people what their favorite teams were, football teams for example, 4 people said the Falcons, 2 people said the Patriots, and so on and so forth, that is called data. And a term is just a number in that data set. If I have, for example, a set of grades, 10 kids, I've got a couple 90s, I got a couple 85s, I got 5, 75s and so on. That is called a term. The 75, the 90, the 95, those numbers are called the term. So let's start with some questions here. Mason thinks that there are more right-handed people at Creekland Middle School than left-handed people. He decided to perform a survey of the first 30 kids that walked into the school building and found that 27 of them were right-handed. With this information, could he conclude that he was correct and that most people at Creekland Middle School are right-handed? What we have to do is look at what we call the integrity of the survey. he decided to perform a survey of the first 30 kids that walked into the school building. I would say that's pretty random and a pretty representative sample. I would argue that that is the case. Because he didn't just go ask the girls in his math class. That's a small group of kids in a 7th grade math class. That might be a little bit different than just asking the first 30 kids he sees. Now, the questions are, what was the population? The overall population here is the kids at Curriculum Middle School, the entire school. We're not talking about kids at Woodstock Middle. We're not talking about kids throughout the county. Our population that we're interested in is all the kids at Curriculum Middle School. Well, if that's the case, what is the representative sample? It was 30. More specifically, it was the 30 kids, the first 30 kids he saw. That was his representative sample, and again, I would argue that that would be a pretty good way to conduct a survey if you're going to do it. Can he be confident in his conclusion? Explain your answer. I think we've explained that thus far. Unless he knew that all 7th graders were coming in at that time, he could guess that out of those 30 kids, you would have a fairly even mix, maybe not perfect, but a fairly even mix of 7th graders, 8th graders, and 6th graders, 7th graders, and 8th graders, and boys and girls. So I think that sample overall reflects the population. Number 2, Collins surveyed every boy on the Curriculum Middle School football team and asked what his favorite subject was. Out of the 35 boys on the team, most of them chose math. Can the results of Collins' survey be used to make inferences or conclusions about the entire Curriculum Middle School population? Explain your answer. I would argue no. Because if you're just asking boys on a football team, you may have a very specific group of interest there. Okay? My suggestion would be to do what we did in that last question, was try to randomly select as many people as you can, not just a small group of people. Because in my opinion, just the boys on the Curriculum Middle School football team, all 35 of them, even though there's a lot, pretty good number, 35, do not represent the overall population. So I would answer, no, I do not think that represents the population very well. Number 3, what if Colin decided to ask a group of 30 kids in the lunchroom what their favorite subject was? Can the results of Colin's survey be used to make inferences or conclusions about the entire population? I would argue that if he came across 30 random people in the lunchroom, that would be at least a better sample, or a better representative sample than what he did before. Now, it's true that he may only be able to talk to 7th graders at that time, because usually the 6th graders eat together, 7th graders and 8th graders eat together, but it at least would be better than what he did before. Okay? You're going to have a good mix of boys and girls. You're going to have a good mix of different interests because everybody eats lunch. Okay? Number 4. Jason asked several Curriculum Middle School 7th graders, 7th grade students, what their favorite football team was. The results are in the table below. If there are 400 7th graders at Curriculum Middle School, how many would you predict prefer the Falcons? And I haven't filled this in, but we're going to say team up top and the number of kids. Okay, so we've got the Falcons here, and this will be filled in on your worksheet. We've got the Patriots here. We've got the Packers here. And we've got the Giants here. $50 of the kids said Falcons. Okay. 20 of the kids said the Patriots. 10 said Packers, and 10 said the Giants. Okay. So we interviewed a group of kids, and we wanted to get an overall idea of what their favorite team was. Well, we live in Atlanta. It's not surprising that most of them like the Falcons. Okay. The results are in the table below. If there are 400 7th graders at Curriculum Middle School, how many would you predict prefer the Falcons? Well, how many did we interview here? Did we have time to interview all 400? No, we did not. Okay. This is a sample. But we can get an idea of how many of the overall population would like the Falcons by looking at this data right here. Well, how do we do that, Mr. Camp? Well, simply look at your sample size. Our sample size is a total of all the people surveyed. We got 50 plus 20. I'm sorry, this should be 5. Forgive me. This should be 5. 50 plus 20 plus 5 plus 5 is 80. And 50 of them like the Falcons. Well, can I set that equal to X over 400? Remember how we did that before the holiday break? Now we've got a proportion. We can say, well, if 50 out of 80 like the Falcons, then I can reasonably predict how many out of 400 will, if this is a representative sample. If we didn't just go ask the boys on the football team. If we didn't just ask the 6th grade girls. We asked an overall group of people. So I can simply say 50 times 400, which is 20,000, and set that equal to 80 times X. Divide by 80 on both sides. And if you take your time and do the math on that, you're going to come up with 250. 250 kids, approximately, we can guess, would prefer, out of the 400, would prefer the Falcons, if we believe this to be a representative sample. Okay. So we say, look, 50 out of 80 kids like the Falcons. We can predict that X out of 400 will. We cross multiply, set it equal, just like we did last time. Okay. Tell whether the following samples are good. In other words, would they represent an overall population? Would they represent an overall population? Every third shopper at a clothing store is asked whether or not they own a pet. I would argue that that's a pretty representative sample of the overall population. We want to get an idea if what percentage of the population owns pets. Okay. If you just go to a random store, let's say you go to Kohl's, you go to Walmart, you go to Sears, you go to wherever. If you ask every third shopper whether or not they own a pet, I would argue, because most people shop for clothes. It's a generic place. Most people go. I think that would be a good representation. So I would say yes. However, if you ask every third shopper at a pet store whether or not they own a pet, if you want to get an idea if the overall population, what percentage of them, or what number out of 100, for example, own a pet, and you go to a pet store, you're going to get a very, very slanted or biased sample. Because if you have a pet store, more than likely you're going there to get something for your pet. So I would argue that maybe up here, if you've got, 35 out of 100 people own pets, here you're going to have about 95 out of 100. Okay? This would be an example of a biased sample. So I would argue here, no. At the beach in the summer, 150 people are asked to name their favorite vacation spot. Well, chances are, if they're at the beach, that is their favorite vacation spot. So I would argue that, no, this is not a good sample question, or not a good sample. D, a survey is mailed to 50 homes in a neighborhood asking residents to name their favorite vacation spot. I would argue that's a little bit more random. You're going to get a bigger mix of the population. You're going to get a bigger group of overall people. I would argue that, yes, that is a good sample, a representative sample. Number 6, Tony did a survey of 8 students at Creekville Middle School and asked them to name their favorite baseball team. Later on, he did a survey of 50 Creekville Middle School students and asked what their favorite school lunch was. Now, these are 2 different subjects, but one he asked 8 and one he asked 50. Which of these surveys do you think provided the most accurate results? Anytime, as long as your sample is random, anytime you can do a survey and have more people in it, the more people you have in that sample, the better your data is going to be. Okay? If I only ask 2 people what their favorite sport is at Creekville Middle School, and they tell me water polo, and I think that's a good representation of the overall population, which it is not, I can promise you that, you're going to get a biased sample. Okay? The best thing to do is number one, make your survey as random as possible, and number two, ask as many people as you can. So 50 would be the correct answer here. Martha is planning on surveying people at a local water park to determine the most popular water slide at the park. Describe a good way to get an accurate answer. Okay, you're not going to go over to a slide where the kids are running on that slide over and over and over again and asking them, hey, what's your favorite slide? More than likely, they're going to say that is their slide, their favorite slide at the park. You might say something along the lines of, well, we're going to ask every third person that walks into the ticket booth as they come into the water park, or every fourth person, or every fifth person, or every other person. You're not just going to ask the boys. Boys have different interests than girls in many cases. Okay? So my suggestion would be at the gate, or maybe as people go to grab a bite to eat or something like that at the lunch counter, ask random people what they prefer. A newspaper is trying to determine which presidential candidate will win the next election. The choice is between candidate A and candidate B. Would it be reasonable to ask everyone who voted in the last election to see who will win? Well, I got news for you. Over 120 million people voted in the last election. Okay? Or close to 120 million people. You do not have time to ask all those people. You have to lower your sample size because you do not have the time or the money. It would cost you hundreds of millions of dollars to survey that many people. Okay? So you're going to shrink your sample size. Try to get a random group, but no, it would not be reasonable. Mark owns a restaurant. He took a random survey to see what his customers' favorite soda is. 14 said Coke, 17 said Sprite, 22 said Dr. Pepper, 27 said Coke Zero. What was the sample size? All you simply have to do is add up 14, 17, 22, and 27. That is your sample size. That's basically how many people you asked. Okay, so we've got 11, 13, 20. Carry the 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We have a sample size of 80. Using the information from the last question, if 240 people came in to eat at Mark's restaurant, how many would you predict would order Sprite? Well, how many ordered Sprite in the survey? Out of 80, we had a total of 17 order Sprite. But we want to predict how many out of 240. Okay. And we would simply cross multiply. I'm not going to do it here, but you're going to cross multiply and get the answer. You're going to multiply 17 times 240. That's going to be 4,080. You have to set that equal to what? 80x. 80x equals 4080. You're going to divide both sides by 80. And you're going to get x equals 51. So we can reasonably conclude that 51 people out of 240 will order Sprite. I'm going to go quick here because I'm running out of time. Mike took a survey of his students in the 7th grade to see how many would like to join a book club. He surveyed 48 students, and 10 said they would join. If there are 240 students in his grade, how many students might Mike expect to join the club? This is simply a proportion again. We would say 10 who would join over the 48 sample. Set that equal to 240 over x. Again, we would cross multiply, and we would have 48x equals 2,400. Then we would, of course, solve for x by dividing by 48. And we get 50. He can expect about 50 people to join if that survey is representative. A survey asked 45 students at Caruca Middle School what sport they would like added as an extracurricular activity. Students who participated were randomly selected during lunch. What is the population? What is the sample? Well, the population is, of course, we're trying to get an idea of how many kids, what kids at Caruca Middle School like, what sport they like. So CMS students is the population. The sample is the 45 kids questioned at the random survey.